Have you ever felt invisible in a room full of people? That quiet, gnawing sensation that your presence doesn't matter, that your voice, your needs, your very existence could vanish without anyone noticing. For some, this is not a fleeting feeling. For many children, it is a daily reality, a reality that silently shapes their minds, emotions, and the trajectory of their entire lives. Ignored children carry an invisible wound. Unlike a broken arm or a scraped knee, this wound cannot be bandaged. It festers in the quiet spaces where love, attention, and validation were meant to thrive. And though they may grow into adults who seem competent, charming, or even successful, the echoes of neglect linger, subtly influencing every choice, every relationship, every flicker of self-worth. The unseen impact of neglect. Neglect is not always loud. It doesn't always roar or scream. Often, it whispers, small omissions that accumulate over time, a parent too distracted to notice, a teacher who overlooks the quiet student, a sibling whose voice always dominates. These moments, seemingly insignificant, become the threads of a hidden narrative: I am not enough. I do not matter. Psychologists call this a form of attachment disruption. The ignored child struggles to form a secure bond with caregivers. Without consistent acknowledgement, children internalize the belief that their needs are secondary. This is not laziness or selfishness on the part of the child, it is the brain adapting to survival in an emotionally barren environment. Walking through life with invisibility. As the ignored child grows, the effects extend beyond the home. In social situations, they may shrink in size, hesitant to speak, fearful that attention brings criticism or rejection. In relationships, they may overcompensate, giving too much, seeking validation from partners, friends, or colleagues. Success can feel hollow, because even triumph is tinged with the fear it will be overlooked or dismissed. Researchers have found that chronic emotional neglect in childhood is linked to depression, anxiety, low self-esteem, and difficulty forming trusting relationships. Yet, the more insidious damage is often invisible: a constant, low-grade sense of inadequacy, a quiet voice in the mind that whispers, "Don't expect to be seen. Don't expect to be loved." The roots of neglect. Understanding the psychology of the ignored child means examining not only the effects but also the causes. Parents may be absent emotionally due to their own trauma, stress, or mental health struggles. Some children are ignored in favor of siblings, others are simply overlooked because their personalities are quieter or less demanding. Whatever the cause, the result is the same: the child internalizes neglect as a fundamental truth about themselves. Neglect is subtle but insidious. It doesn't leave bruises that everyone notices. It leaves patterns of thought, coping mechanisms, and emotional habits that persist into adulthood. The paradox of the invisible child. Ironically, many children who are ignored develop exceptional resilience. They may become fiercely independent, highly empathetic, and deeply observant. They learn to navigate the world with heightened sensitivity, noticing nuances others miss. But this resilience comes at a cost: a persistent undercurrent of self-doubt, a fear of being truly seen, and a longing for validation that can never fully be satisfied by others. This paradox, strength forged from neglect, yet haunted by it, is the core of the psychology of the ignored child. It explains why some adults who were overlooked as children shine brightly in their careers or social circles yet struggle in intimacy, self-expression, or emotional authenticity. Takeaway. The ignored child's story is not always visible, but it is profound. Their silence speaks volumes. Their coping strategies, both adaptive and maladaptive, shape every interaction and every relationship they encounter. Understanding this psychology is not only crucial for healing but also for recognizing the subtle, lasting impacts of childhood neglect that extend far beyond the years of early development. The brain of the ignored child: how neglect reshapes emotional and cognitive development. Imagine a young brain, delicate and malleable, designed to form bonds, absorb love, and learn from attention. Now imagine that brain starved of recognition, affirmation, and emotional engagement. What grows in its place is not empty, but anxious, hypervigilant, and fragile, a survival mechanism masquerading as personality. For the ignored child, every overlooked question, every unacknowledged achievement, every absent hug writes a silent code into the brain. This code dictates how they perceive the world, how they trust others, and how they trust themselves. The neurology of neglect. Neglect in childhood isn't just emotionally painful, it alters brain development. Neuroimaging studies show that children who experience chronic neglect have differences in brain regions responsible for emotion regulation, stress response, and social cognition. Amygdala, hyperactive, leading to heightened fear, anxiety, and vigilance. The ignored child may constantly scan the environment for signs of rejection or disapproval, even in safe contexts. Prefrontal cortex, often underdeveloped or less active, impairing decision-making, impulse control, and emotional regulation. The child may struggle to manage frustration or respond appropriately in social situations. Hippocampus, smaller volume in some neglected children, affecting memory and the ability to contextualize emotional experiences. They may ruminate over past slights or replay scenarios where they felt unseen. This neurological imprint is not immutable, but it is profound. It explains why some adults who were ignored as children instinctively avoid emotional risk, struggle with intimacy, or feel chronically anxious in relationships. Emotional consequences, fear, shame, and loneliness. Neglect teaches children a cruel lesson: you are unimportant. This lesson embeds itself in the emotional core, producing chronic shame, an internalized belief that their needs are inherently burdensome or unworthy of attention. Social anxiety, a fear of speaking up or asserting themselves, born from repeated experiences of being overlooked or dismissed. Emotional suppression, to avoid further neglect or rejection, ignored children may learn to hide their feelings, creating a disconnect between inner experience and outward expression. The combination of these factors often manifests in adulthood as difficulty trusting others, fear of abandonment, and a relentless inner critic that questions every move and decision. Behavioral adaptations, coping with invisibility. To survive neglect, children develop coping mechanisms, some adaptive, some harmful. These include people-pleasing, overcompensating for perceived unworthiness by constantly seeking approval. Hyperindependence, avoiding reliance on others, believing self-sufficiency is the only path to safety. Attention-seeking, acting out or performing to ensure someone, anyone, notices them. While these behaviors can appear contradictory, they are unified by a single purpose: to reclaim the attention and validation the child was denied. The child learns that emotional survival requires strategic navigation of a world that seems indifferent. The interpersonal shadow of neglect. Adults who were ignored as children often carry forward patterns of relational difficulty. They may struggle to recognize and express their own needs. Gravitate toward partners who replicate the dynamics of neglect, either emotionally unavailable or highly critical. Overextend themselves to maintain relationships, fearing that attention will vanish if they don't perform. These dynamics are unconscious, yet deeply entrenched. Without awareness, they perpetuate a cycle of neglect, now internalized and self-directed. The silver lining, resilience and sensitivity. Despite these challenges, the ignored child often develops exceptional sensitivity and empathy. Having learned to read emotional cues to survive, they become acutely aware of others' feelings and needs. When guided with care, these traits can transform into emotional intelligence, creativity, and profound capacity for connection. Healing requires recognition of the invisible wounds, conscious effort to challenge ingrained beliefs, and intentional practice of self-validation. The brain, though shaped by neglect, retains its plasticity. Emotional growth, though challenging, is possible. Takeaway. Neglect rewires the brain and reshapes emotional development. The ignored child learns to survive in an environment that devalues them, producing coping strategies that can appear paradoxical: strength and sensitivity paired with fear and self-doubt. Understanding these patterns is essential for breaking the cycle, fostering healing, and reclaiming a sense of worth. The emotional landscape, how ignored children experience love, trust, and connection. Love is meant to be the sanctuary of childhood, the safe harbor where a child can grow, explore, and feel seen. But for the ignored child, love often arrives as a whisper rather than a shout. They learn early that affection is conditional, attention is scarce, and connection is fragile. The result is an emotional landscape colored by longing, fear, and cautious hope. The hunger for connection. Ignored children are constantly reaching for something they cannot define. They crave acknowledgement in simple forms, a smile, a kind word, a gentle touch. When these gestures are absent, their brains encode the experience as rejection, even if it is subtle or unintended. This early hunger manifests in adulthood as seeking external validation, relying on others to confirm worth, sometimes at the expense of personal boundaries. Hypervigilance in relationships, reading into small cues, looking for signs of withdrawal or disinterest. Difficulty accepting love, feeling unworthy of attention, affection, or care, even from those who genuinely offer it. Trust as a fragile construct. For the ignored child, trust is not freely given, it is earned cautiously, if at all. Early experiences teach them that caregivers may be unreliable. Attention is fleeting. Emotional support is conditional. As adults, they may struggle to form deep, secure attachments. Friendships and romantic relationships can feel like high-risk ventures, with every interaction scrutinized for potential rejection. The result is emotional guardedness, where the desire for closeness is shadowed by fear of being hurt or overlooked. Love tainted by expectation. Ignored children often conflate love with performance. They may learn that only certain behaviors, obedience, achievement, people-pleasing, garner attention. This pattern creates a transactional view of love, where giving is always linked to receiving recognition. In adult relationships, this can manifest as overcompensating to maintain attention or affection. Misinterpreting normal independence from a partner as withdrawal or rejection. Feeling persistent anxiety that their love is not enough. Emotional numbing and the inner void. When repeated attempts to gain attention fail, ignored children may develop emotional numbing. This protective mechanism suppresses longing and pain, but it also limits their capacity to fully experience joy, excitement, and intimacy. They may appear calm, composed, or self-sufficient on the surface. Internally, they feel a void, a space where recognition and warmth should have been. Relationships can feel simultaneously necessary and terrifying, as emotional exposure risks reopening old wounds. The paradox of empathy. Interestingly, the ignored child's emotional deprivation often produces heightened empathy. Because they became experts at reading others to anticipate moods, desires, and attention, they often excel at understanding feelings that others overlook. However, this empathy can become a double-edged sword. They may absorb others' emotions excessively, neglecting their own needs. Their own boundaries can become blurred, leading to imbalance in relationships. Emotional intelligence may mask a fragile inner world that remains largely unseen. Rewriting the narrative. Healing the emotional scars of neglect begins with awareness. Recognizing the patterns of longing, fear, and conditional love. Learning to self-soothe and validate emotions internally rather than externally. Practicing vulnerability in a safe context, rebuilding trust step by step. Therapy, mindful self-reflection, and intentional relational practice can help ignored children, now adults, reclaim emotional resilience and rewrite their internal narrative from one of invisibility to one of worth. Takeaway. The ignored child's emotional landscape is complex, a mix of longing, hypervigilance, and guarded hope. Love and trust, once unstable, can be relearned. Through conscious effort, the adult survivor of childhood neglect can transform their inner world, cultivating connection, intimacy, and emotional authenticity. The social world of the ignored child, friendships, peer rejection, and the mask of normalcy. Children are social beings by nature, wired to connect, play, and belong. Yet for the ignored child, the playground, the classroom, and even family gatherings can feel like minefields. Every interaction carries the unspoken question, will I matter? Will anyone notice me? The ignored child learns early that being seen is uncertain, and belonging is fragile. The invisible child among peers. In peer groups, ignored children often occupy the background. Their contributions may be overlooked, their ideas dismissed, or their feelings minimized. Over time, this fosters a pattern of social withdrawal, staying quiet to avoid further rejection. Overcompensation, performing, showing off, or acting louder to capture attention. Hyperobservation, becoming experts at reading social cues to anticipate exclusion or ridicule. The social skills of ignored children are often nuanced. They may understand group dynamics deeply, but struggle to assert themselves confidently. The pain of peer rejection. Early social neglect can leave scars as deep as parental neglect. Children learn that inclusion is unpredictable. Popularity is often linked to assertiveness or conformity, not worthiness. Friendship is conditional. As a result, ignored children may develop social anxiety, shyness, or a fear of judgment. In adolescence, these tendencies can compound, leading to isolation or attachment to peers who replicate neglectful patterns. The mask of normalcy. Many ignored children learn to wear a mask, an adaptive facade that hides insecurity and longing. This mask may take the form of politeness and compliance, avoiding conflict to remain unnoticed but safe. Charm or humor, using wit to engage others without revealing inner vulnerability. Academic or extracurricular overachievement, seeking recognition through measurable success rather than emotional connection. While these strategies can help children navigate social worlds, they also create a disconnect between their inner and outer selves, a silent tension that often persists into adulthood. Long-term social impacts. Adults who were ignored as children may carry these social patterns forward. Difficulty forming deep friendships, relying on acquaintances for connection. Fear of vulnerability, leading to transactional or superficial relationships. Overcompensation in social settings, sometimes attracting attention but not genuine connection. Ironically, these adults often excel in professional or structured environments, where rules and performance metrics provide predictable validation. Yet in intimate social situations, they may still feel unseen or misunderstood. Healing the social self. Reclaiming social confidence after childhood neglect involves awareness of patterns, recognizing learned behaviors that once protected but now limit growth. Intentional social practice, engaging in safe, supportive groups to experiment with authenticity. Self-acceptance, learning that their voice and presence are inherently valuable, even if previously ignored. Through these steps, the ignored child, now adult, can gradually replace the mask with genuine connection, transforming social anxiety into confident relational engagement. Takeaway. The social world of the ignored child is fraught with uncertainty, rejection, and invisibility. Peer neglect compounds parental neglect, fostering withdrawal, hypervigilance, and performance-driven social strategies. Healing requires conscious effort to rebuild trust, authenticity, and confidence in relationships. Coping mechanisms and survival strategies, how ignored children adapt and protect themselves. When a child's world repeatedly signals, "You do not matter," survival becomes a psychological art form. The ignored child quickly learns that emotional exposure can be dangerous, that expressing needs can be futile, and that invisibility is often safer than visibility. What emerges is a repertoire of coping mechanisms, some adaptive, some subtly destructive, that can last a lifetime. Hyperindependence, strength born from neglect. One of the most common adaptations is hyperindependence. Ignored children often internalize the message that they cannot rely on others for support. They learn to solve problems alone, manage their emotions internally, and suppress their needs. Adaptive aspect, this fosters resilience, self-reliance, and resourcefulness. Many adults who were ignored as children excel in demanding careers and high-pressure situations. Maladaptive aspect, hyperindependence can create isolation, difficulty asking for help, and avoidance of intimate connections. It may also mask emotional vulnerability, making genuine relationships challenging. People-pleasing and conditional self-worth. To gain the attention that eluded them, ignored children often become experts in pleasing others. They learn that compliance, charm, or achievement is rewarded, while asserting their own needs risks further neglect. Adaptive aspect. People-pleasing can foster social cohesion, empathy, and cooperation. Ignored children become highly attuned to the emotions and desires of those around them. Maladaptive aspect. Chronic people-pleasing erodes self-esteem, fosters resentment, and makes boundaries difficult to maintain. The individual may perpetually chase validation that can never fully satisfy. Emotional suppression, shielding the inner world. Repeated neglect teaches children that expressing feelings may go unnoticed or be met with indifference. As a result, many develop emotional suppression, a strategy to protect themselves from further hurt. Adaptive aspect. Emotional suppression can allow a child to survive harsh or indifferent environments without constant psychological pain. Maladaptive aspect. Long-term suppression can lead to difficulty accessing emotions, decreased emotional intelligence, and challenges in forming intimate bonds as adults. Attention-seeking and performance strategies. Some ignored children respond by becoming highly performative, striving to stand out in academics, sports, or social contexts. Recognition, even fleeting, becomes a lifeline for their self-worth. Adaptive aspect. Performance-driven behavior can cultivate talent, ambition, and goal-directed behavior. Maladaptive aspect. Reliance on external validation reinforces the internalized belief that they are only worthy if others notice, creating a fragile sense of self-esteem. Hypervigilance and social scanning. Ignored children often develop a hyper-awareness of their surroundings, constantly scanning for signs of attention, rejection, or danger. Adaptive aspect. This heightened perception can make them highly perceptive, empathetic, and socially intelligent. Maladaptive aspect. Hypervigilance can fuel anxiety, overthinking, and difficulty relaxing in relationships, as the fear of neglect persists unconsciously. The paradox of adaptation. These coping mechanisms are paradoxical. They allow the ignored child to survive and even thrive in certain areas, yet they often create invisible barriers to authentic connection and emotional fulfillment. Without recognition of these patterns, the strategies can perpetuate cycles of insecurity, relational difficulty, and self-doubt into adulthood. Rewriting survival strategies into strengths. Healing requires transforming adaptive survival mechanisms into conscious strengths. Hyperindependence empowered autonomy, learning to ask for support without shame. People-pleasing empathic assertiveness, using sensitivity to connect without sacrificing personal boundaries. Emotional suppression emotional literacy, practicing awareness, expression, and regulation of feelings. Performance-driven validation self-validation, cultivating internal recognition rather than relying solely on external praise. Hypervigilance mindful presence, channeling perceptiveness into observation without anxiety or fear. Through self-awareness, therapy, and consistent practice, the ignored child, now adult, can reclaim agency, self-worth, and the ability to connect authentically. Takeaway. Ignored children develop a suite of coping strategies to survive emotional neglect. While these mechanisms are often adaptive in childhood, they can become barriers in adulthood. Conscious recognition and transformation of these strategies into strengths is the path toward healing, emotional freedom, and meaningful connection. Attachment styles and relationship patterns, how neglect shapes love, intimacy, and trust. Every adult relationship carries echoes of childhood. For the ignored child, these echoes are often loud and persistent, whispering warnings and insecurities. Don't get too close. You may be abandoned. You are unworthy. What begins as subtle neglect in childhood becomes a blueprint for how love, trust, and intimacy are experienced for a lifetime. Attachment theory and the ignored child. Attachment theory explains that early interactions with caregivers shape how individuals approach relationships. Ignored children often develop insecure attachment styles, which can be classified as avoidant attachment. These individuals learn early that their needs would not be met. They often maintain emotional distance, suppress vulnerability, and fear dependence on others. Anxious attachment. Ignored children with inconsistent attention may cling to relationships, craving validation while fearing rejection, creating cycles of anxiety and insecurity. Disorganized attachment. Experiencing both neglect and occasional attention can produce conflicting approaches to relationships, simultaneous desire for closeness and fear of being hurt, often resulting in chaotic or confusing patterns. These attachment patterns profoundly influence how adults navigate intimacy, trust, and emotional connection. Love through the lens of neglect. Adults who were ignored as children may perceive love as conditional, something earned rather than freely given. This belief can manifest in several ways. Overgiving in relationships, attempting to secure love by meeting others' needs at the expense of their own. Fear of abandonment, hypervigilant monitoring of partners' behaviors, interpreting minor actions as threats to connection. Difficulty receiving love, feeling unworthy of affection or doubting genuine care, even when consistently offered. This creates a relational paradox. While deeply craving connection, the adult may simultaneously push love away or sabotage intimacy. Patterns of relational replication. Ignored children unconsciously seek out partners who mirror early neglect experiences. They may be drawn to emotionally unavailable or critical partners, repeating patterns of unfulfilled longing. This is not conscious choice, it is the mind attempting to resolve unfinished childhood dynamics. Other relational consequences include boundary difficulties, struggling to assert needs without fear of rejection. Hyperresponsibility, taking on partners' emotional burdens to secure attention. Conflict avoidance, suppressing disagreement to prevent withdrawal or neglect. Without awareness, these patterns perpetuate relational dissatisfaction and reinforce the child's early beliefs about love and self-worth. Healing attachment wounds. Transforming relational patterns requires conscious effort. Self-awareness, recognizing how childhood neglect influences present behaviors. Therapeutic intervention, working with trauma-informed therapists to rewire attachment and foster secure relational patterns. Safe relational experiments, gradually practicing vulnerability with trustworthy partners or friends. Self-validation practices, learning to meet emotional needs internally rather than depending solely on others. Over time, these strategies help adults break the cycle of insecurity, creating relationships rooted in authenticity rather than fear or compensation. The paradox of intimacy. While childhood neglect makes love and trust challenging, it also equips individuals with heightened emotional intelligence and empathy. Once patterns of insecurity are recognized and healed, these adults can form profoundly deep, sensitive, and emotionally attuned relationships, something often unattainable without confronting and integrating childhood neglect experiences. Takeaway. Neglect in childhood deeply shapes attachment and relational patterns. Adults who were ignored may struggle with intimacy, trust, and conditional self-worth, but awareness, therapeutic intervention, and conscious practice can transform these patterns. Healing allows the ignored child to reclaim authentic connection, creating relationships based on trust, mutual respect, and emotional fulfillment.